So, in this section, we're going to talk about training your mind for happiness. That is, disciplining the mind and watching out for the obstacles of happiness and thinking about particular patterns of belief or ways of looking at the world that are good for health and happiness. We find that there is a clear evidence of the benefits of resilient mind. That is, training a mind with different activities as people respond to trauma. So, Shelley Taylor of UCLA made this very important discovery in 1984 that people, when diagnosed with diseases, show profound resilience. We see that this in some ways is construing the disease as a way to adapt. George Bonanno out of Columbia University has shown time and time again that people respond with incredible sort of shifts in thinking and patterns of resilience to every imaginable trauma, from forms of abuse to losing a spouse in the middle of life. We have these resilient patterns of thoughts. So, what I really hope in this module is that we zero in on what are the healthy patterns of thoughts that may be good for health, happiness and health. Now, the one way to think about this is, first of all, we should be mindful and alert to toxic patterns of thoughts that can really cost us in terms of our happiness. So let's look at a few of those and see if these ring true bell for us. A first one that has really captivated a lot of scholarship is the real perils of perfectionism. The sense that I can always be perfect is really an obstacle to own happiness. Carol Dweck at Stanford University has devoted decades of her career on studying different types of mindsets. When parents and teachers praise their kids for being perfect, the kids feel alienated and anxious. By contrast, when you praise your kids for just trying hard and putting effort into something, they feel motivated. So these are studies that show that if you get individuals in this work, in this area, in this field by Tori Higgins, for example, to kind of things that are ideal aspirations in a sort of oppressive way, it makes them feel dejected and anxious. So we have to watch out for these kind of perfectionistic ideals. Steve Hinshaw, a colleague here, one of our colleagues at UC Berkeley actually writes about triple bind. So what actually it's in this, especially young women, particularly with this epidemic of being of perfectionism, today's expectation says that they should not only be beautiful and smart, but also powerful and athletic and sort of changing the world's circumstances, and that can be too much in terms of perfectionism, right? So this is like the first potential toxic that you can think of. The second toxic, though, and Luberin Mirsky in UC Riverside actually has done an excellent work on this, is always the idea of comparing self with others. So the perils of social comparison, of keeping up with others and constantly comparing, is really harmful. And we know from studies about happier people that they tend to define their happiness on their own terms and not by comparing themselves to others, and think about how they're always failing short. And the other thing that we should be mindful of as a peril or potential toxic thought, is which comes from Tom Gilowicz's work on really thinking about how we devote resources either to material objects or commodities versus experiences with others. So we have learned time and again that if we orient the mind towards experiences, we fare well in terms of happiness. If we orient the expenditure of money or what we are interested in or pursuing the material objects, it costs us in terms of our personal happiness. On this kind of theme, one of the great discoveries in this new science of happiness on the potential toxic thoughts was by Barry Schwartz and his a colleague, Swarthmore, where Barry was really interested in how we approach our experiences of pleasure. Going out for dinner, having a drink with friends, seeing a play, taking a walk in the woods or by the beach. Well, what Schwartz has done is really to differentiate two different ways of looking at our experiences. One approach is to maximize pleasure. For every instant, we try to get as much happiness out of it as possible. Another approach is what he calls it as satisficing. That is like kind of like economic term, which is to find delight in what's given to us, to take pleasure in what we have. So he measures this with a really innovative scale. So let me give you a couple of items here on screen that measures maximizing versus satisficing. So if you are a maximizer, you would agree to the following statements. So when I'm in the car listening to music, I often check out stations to see if something better is playing, even if I'm satisfied with what I'm already listening to. You're always going to look for opportunities to maximize more pleasure. And as you might imagine, that Schwartz and colleagues find that mindset of always wanting more happiness, trying to maximize one's own pleasure, costs us in terms of our happiness. Maximizers, when identified with this scale, when they purchase things, it's found that they have more regret, they have less satisfaction with life, they tend to be more depressed. When they do well in circumstances, they often actually feel less satisfied, and they are actually less optimistic about what the future holds. So, this as we kind of like round out our discussion on these toxic thoughts and sort of ways in which we can, train our happiness and greater contentment and delight in our current circumstances, it's really important to sort of bring to bear, to have that in mind, the literature on positive emotions. So the role that emotions play in our life, different types of emotions, like joy, curiosity, pride, amusement, a sense of gratitude, savoring every moment, and all of this in a lot of ways of how it contributes to our true happiness and health is what we're going to see in the remainder of this module.